Hello, I'm here. I'm Greg. I'm here with Stacey Sher, and we're going to talk about Get Shorty. We're going to talk about Dutch. So, Stacey, what's your earliest memories of meeting Dutch and being exposed to his work, and so forth?
Well, it's funny. I knew that we were going to have this conversation today, so I was thinking about the earliest memories, and I remember the first time I met him was with he and his first wife on the Sony lot. We all had lunch, and that was the first time we met in person. We were already working on Get Shorty, and he happened to be in Los Angeles, his wife who passed away. And that was before I met, before he met Christine, who obviously we all got to know even better. But we all had just a beautiful lunch at the Columbia Commissary. And he was I don't think you were there. And Michael Shamberg was definitely there. I'm pretty sure Danny DeVito was there, and I can't remember if Scott was there.
Or maybe Michael Siegel might have been there.
Maybe Michael Siegel was there, but I don't think so. I don't think so. I kind of remember walking through the lot and showing them a little bit of the lot during Get Shorty and how it had been redone.
Had you?
But the beginning of Get Shorty was, which I'm sure Scott talked about, was Barry Sonnenfeld, who famously hates flying, had a flight delayed and he was at the airport and he bought the paperback of Get Shorty at the airport and read the book, fell in love with it, and called Danny DeVito, who he had been the cinematographer for Danny on Throw Mama from the Train, and they became very close friends before Barry was the director. And he said, Danny, I read this book. I really think you should read it. And Danny not only read the book, but our company bought it. And when Barry called back a week later, he said, Danny, have you read the book? And he said, I bought it, Barry. He goes, well, I really think you should read it. He said, no, I bought it, Barry. And that began the process. And Scott Frank is my oldest friend in the movie business. We met when I was 21 years old and had first started working on the Paramount lot. And mutual friends had introduced us. And, we became pals right away. And for years before we worked together, we were very close friends. So I knew how much he loved Elmore Leonard. And he's always super busy, two or three projects stacked up. And so when I first said to him, are you available? He said no. And weirdly, it was one book he hadn't read. And we went through a series of meetings with some very high profile writers. We heard pitches. We were never blown away by anything. And I thought, I've got to try Scott again. I've got to push him. I know how much he loves Elmore. And I may never get to work on another Elmore Leonard novel again. And this is my oldest friend in the movie business. I'm not going to let him potentially miss out on this. So I called him again. He was leaving. My memory is he was flying to New York on a red-eye flight. And I remember, and he said, okay, I'm going to take the book with me and read it on the plane. And I remember my phone ringing at like 6 o'clock in the morning, Los Angeles time. And I answered it. I was getting ready for work and I answered the phone and it was Scott Frank saying, fuck you, because he had to do the adaptation and he knew that it was going to blow up a lot of things in his life. And that was the beginning of it.
And then just like go through the whole process of Dutch being really a part of welcomed into the production in a way that you never see that happening with authors.
Well, I think, aside from, I have a great picture of Scott and Elmore and I from the set of Get Shorty because he came to visit us when we were shooting at at Danny's character's house when they're the famous "Look at Me" scene. He came to visit that day, and it's so funny because I'm wearing this like teal colored Armani suit. And I remember it so well because to be like cool in Hollywood as a woman at the time, like to have an Armani suit, but the color's so odd and it was on sale and I could only afford to buy it because it was on sale and it didn't matter whether the color was good for me or not. That was the only Armani suit that I could afford to buy, but I'm wearing it on set and it's kind of hilarious. And we're all there. Barry, Danny, Michael, Scott, Elmore, and I are all there. We spent a lot of time talking about things, and I always joke, and though Scott didn't do the adaptation of Be Cool, where we all, where we really got to know each other even more because Dutch was doing the research into the music industry, and I was setting you guys up to meet people. But what I remember was in both we cut the studio executive, the late Laura Ziskin, who was my friend, inspired out of the movie, in both books. She's in both books, and we cut that whole storyline out because it really needed to become about Chili's love story with Rene Russo's character. And that kept it more focused on the threesome of Chili, Gene Hackman's character, Harry Zim, and Renee's character, and obviously Danny's character as well. So, who was her ex-husband. So, what Scott kind of figured out and took a lot longer in the adaptation of Get Shorty than in the adaptation of Out of Sight was this trap you can fall into, and people had fallen into in adapting Dutch's books, which is every scene is great, and there's a tiny clue that moves the plot forward in every scene. And until I really got to know the two of you and how the two of you work together, and how Dutch just would kind of let the characters take him where they would take him with the incredible research that he'd decide. I always use the example of, and it might have been in the New Yorker profile of you, Greg, the landscaper. If a character's a landscaper, he needed you to tell him what every plant he would encounter in that, 5-mile stretch of North Miami Beach that the character worked in. And that sort of Scott started to condense those things and look at what do we really need to do. Well, we have the limo guys, we have that plot line, we have everybody fighting for the script, and why does Chili love Harry Zim? And there's a scene that Scott wrote that wasn't in the book that ended up not being in the movie, where you actually go to set with Harry Zim and Chili's watching him. And for all of Chili's observation of Hollywood, Harry Zim's the only person who has his same love of movies and the same only person he sees who's actually getting stuff made. So that became an organizing principle. Why do people come here? Why do they want to be in the movie business? What are the things like, and we started watching like classic Hollywood movies, whether it was Day of the Locust or The Bad and the Beautiful, and like looking at the themes of all of those films to figure out what it was that Chili wanted by coming out here, besides to just get away, collect a debt, and get away from Dennis Farina's character. So that, I don't know if that's helpful, but
Yes. And Scott said that you guys all spent a lot of time just getting the script in order. I mean, there was just so much to do.
yeah, we spent a lot of time. It became very clear that the idea early on was the most honest guy in Hollywood is a crook. And so that became an organizing principle for Chili's character. But again, it also was about movies are where you can reinvent yourself. Movies are, what did movies mean to us, and what did movies mean to Chili's character? And so that's why, you have the great scene that is really the interior of the Vista Theater, but the exterior of the theater in Santa Monica. Um, and when Chili goes to the revival house. Um, and, you know, he wants out. He doesn't want petty people anymore. He doesn't, he, and the thing about, so Hollywood is a place that traditionally people have been able to reinvent themselves.
And that was Scott's theme. I mean, he would always tell Dutch what the theme of his books were.
I
But
know. I remember Dutch saying, I never know what the themes of my books are until Scott Frank tells me.
but truly, that was the way Scott had to approach it because he's so methodical. He had to like have a specific idea in mind.
Yeah, I mean, Scott and I spent a long time, much longer on Get Shorty, having these general conversations about that and what it was about, as opposed to just a really fun, one of my favorite things that's ever been said about Dutch's work was said in the review, I believe, of Get Shorty. It might have been of Out of Sight by the wonderful critic David Anson, who at the time was at Newsweek. And he said, Elmore Leonard is Jane Austen behind bars, that it's a comedy of manners. And that really, it's the rules of how you behave. And that really, him understanding hierarchy and culture gave him a leg up in Hollywood.
Indeed. And talk about the premiere. I mean, Get Shorty was the beginning of a like a sort of a landslide or a tsunami or whatever you want to call it of interest in his film work after 10 years in the desert after Stick, which was such a disaster because they did not like use what Barry knew instinctively, and Dutch told Barry, but Barry already knew it. I read his book. He already knew that you don't cut away. These people don't know they're being funny, and you just play it, and that's why Get Shorty is often called a crime comedy.
Yes. Well, I mean, one of my favorite, one of my favorite lines, which I actually think Scott wrote and maybe Dutch didn't write, but maybe he did. I can't, it so blends. I know some things that Scott clearly wrote because Bette Midler's character was referred to as the widow of the author of the script. Um, and she wasn't a character in the book. She was just referred to. And the same thing is true with the Ripper, who Albert Brooks plays in Out of Sight. They became characters that Scott rendered. But Dennis Farina's character says, when they have the whole conversation about IE, EG, IE, I think what your man means to say is ergo, EG. And then Dennis Farina says, EG, IE, fuck you. And that is one of my favorite encapsulations of the humor of it.
Well, I'll have to double check because I'm not sure myself because
Yeah.
with guys like Scott and Graham Yost, they just so channel Dutch that it's really hard to say. As I said to Graham one time, we were watching Justified on the couch, and he heard a line. This is like third season or something. He heard a line and he goes, "Did I write that?" He didn't. It was so
Yep.
close. But
Yep.
so moving on to Out of Sight. I mean, how did that? I mean, all come together. I mean, Scott was a little trepidatious about doing another one. He didn't think lightning could strike twice, but you knew it could.
Yeah, I mean, the book is fantastic. It's romantic and it's sexy and it's completely different than than what Scott had just done. And I mean, he chose not to do the Get Shorty sequel because he felt that he couldn't write Chili as the eye of the hurricane. And he very specifically felt that Chili doesn't drive the action in Be Cool, which he doesn't. He's the calm around all the crazy people because the music business is crazier than the movie business. And that's ultimately why he declined to adapt it. I think it's a really funny movie and I'm really proud of it. I don't think the tone blends quite as well as it did in Get Shorty. Um, but back to Out of Sight, I think Barry Barry was an executive producer on it. He passed on it because really it's not Barry's tone. It's very sexy and very romantic, but again, it is very funny. Um, and we were leaving our deal at Sony and going to our new deal at Universal. And Michael Siegel submitted the book to us, and it became something like, even though we went out, but Scott signed up right away before we went out. We went out as a package with the book, us, Barry as an EP, not as a director, and Scott adapting it. And Universal bought it for us. And then we began the process. And again, the challenge, which at this point now everybody knew, you and Dutch, everybody, much more. The challenge was, in a book, out of sight, out of mind, you could get away with one encounter and them living inside their heads. But how did you put them together enough so that by the end of the movie, you're rooting for them to be together? And understand that these two people have had this moment that, as I think Jennifer Lopez, as Karen Cisco says, um, maybe only happens once a day, once in a life.
Right. And so bringing in Stephen was just an amazing new collaboration.
It was the greatest gift. Working with Steven Soderbergh on that movie was the greatest gift. It was interesting because, one of the things that I'm proudest of that I pulled off and talked Steven into and talked Quentin Tarantino into was Ray Nicolette being in both movies. Because I felt, and Quentin kind of helped us with Travolta when Travolta almost backed out of Get Shorty. Um, and but we had obviously we'd made Pulp Fiction together. Then I had done, with Jersey and Scott, the first super successful Elmore novel, and we were about to make Out of Sight. He was tackling Jackie Brown, Rum Punch, and I felt, and as we've talked about, and Dutch and I talked about, sometimes he just liked names and he would bring them back. And Karen Cisco was actually the bailiff for the character in Rum Punch, Jackie Brown in the movie. And Ray Nicolette is Karen Cisco's boyfriend in Out of Sight. And so I remember saying, because Jackie Brown was shooting ahead of us, I believe. I'm sure they shot first, but and I said, look, obviously it's your Ray Nicolette, but promise me you'll help me talk the actor into being in the one scene in our movie. And I said, because that says to everybody, we're not competing. We're all living in Elmore Leonard's universe and serving him. And he did. He went to the studio. He got some of his wardrobe. He got his sunglasses and made sure that we had the rights to include his character and encouraged Michael Keaton to do it.
It's the ultimate Easter egg out in the open.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, I had a lot of fun with everybody on all those location scouts down in Florida, going to
Yep.
private prisons and in the big
Yep.
van.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I will say that I mean, on Out of Sight, we shot most of the prison. We shot in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge at Angola is where we ended up shooting one of the prison sequences um uh with Yayo. And then we shot the flashback prison where the Ripper is here in Lancaster. And then, we were in Miami for all of the apartment stuff and all the intercoastal work. And we went Los Angeles, um, Louisiana, Miami, and then Detroit for the winter. And
Right.
I just remember we had chartered because the crew was going from place to place. And I remember we had gloves made that said out of sight for everybody going into, and it was so cold and so miserable. And then we ended in Los Angeles, where the whole interior of the Ripley Mansion was on stage at the Universal lot.
Which
And
you've seen a lot of sets in your career, but for me that set was mind blowing.
it was mind blowing for me too. It still is mind blowing to me because I just remember our art director, who later went on to become an extraordinary production designer, um, uh, Phil Messina was was the art director, and then he became our production designer on Aaron Brockovich and went on to be the production designer on the Ocean series. And I just worked with him on Heretic last year. But I remember looking at it, and the set cost like $1.5 million. And, we were making smaller movies that cost that set. I would say, could you believe that that set is the budget, is more expensive than Sex Lies and Videotape? I mean, it was just mind-boggling.
And then the rotating restaurant, with the background of Detroit, that
Yeah.
was
Yeah. I mean,
talk
that,
about special effects. That was great.
yeah. Yeah. And, but I also remember, pre, Detroit was pretty gnarly in those days. And our time and it was a little bit like staying in a hotel in pre-Glasnost Soviet Union. I mean, I we were staying in a hotel that was when gambling was put on the ballot and then failed. We were in a hotel that they were hoping was going to become a casino hotel in Greektown. And I honestly didn't walk on the carpeting without like flip-flops or socks. I took a shower with flip-flops on. It was definitely, I won't say where it was because I don't want to cast aspersions. There was a hot tub in the living room because I think they thought it was going to be like a high roller hotel. Like it was a one bedroom, and the bathtub was a hot tub in the living room. And one our somebody found socks that were not theirs in their bed, and it was definitely,
Well,
um
that was late '90s. That was and the winter didn't make Detroit seem that
I
much
know it
brighter.
was.
And
and and
I
yeah.
imagine that Curtis Hanson, like watched this movie to like get sort of his Detroit down because
Yeah.
it's almost like a visual connection between those running shots that he did in Detroit, and Hanson's movie 8 Mile and the State Theater. That was a
We
great.
had a great time at the State Theater. I mean, we had a great time at the Kronk. I remember Stephen and I went to go see Duran Duran at the State Theater because we were friends with the State Theater people, and I feel like Stephen hung out with Duran Duran all night long. I don't know, that's my memory. It was definitely one of the most fun movies that I've ever worked on. The crew was fantastic. George was so much fun. It was like the height of the George practical jokes, and it was, like Miami was like back in pockets, but it wasn't the glossy thing that it is now. And just South Beach was kind of starting to happen again. And I had grown up in Fort Lauderdale. I will tell the story that
Yeah.
that is I describe as the time that the movie business actually helped me in my real life, which you're one of the stars of that story. You and Jim Bourne from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, who we, of course, got to know well because of you during the research on the movie. You and Dutch were out for the premiere of Jackie Brown, and I was getting ready to go too, when I got a phone call from my mom that my grandmother was missing. Do you remember this?
Oh, I remember. So does Jim.
And well, Jim used to go visit my grandmother, God bless him, for like many times until we moved her out to California when she finally agreed to move out to California. And you put me in touch with Jim, and Jim put out an APB, and they found my grandmother. I mean, she wasn't that far from home, but she eventually had like a small fender bender, and the police knew that it was her and identified her and called my mom and me. I never went to the premiere of Jackie Brown. I saw it in the theater instead. And yeah, you guys like I'll always be forever indebted to the two of you. But I always joke and say it's the only time that it's not the only time, because of course then Stephen and I went on to make Contagion. And so that was another example of how my movie life was helpful in my real life.
Well, the interesting thing about Out of Sight and Scott and you all is that, that it was sort of like you, in a way, transcended Dutch. I mean, you had to make this movie. I mean, and he accepted that in the end. Of course, you know what I'm talking about, the ending.
Hajira Henry, you mean?
Well, we're bringing
Oh, and meeting the Ripper and the all of that stuff.
right, but I mean, but specifically bringing in Sam, Jack,
Yes.
Sam at the end, and how Scott told Dutch that and I'm sure you were part of this thinking that it was her book, but his movie, and that had to be, very clear. But then Scott realized, and you realized, and you all realized that you had to give the audience a little bit of hope at the end, and
Absolutely. I mean, and yeah, the book ending is pretty dark and extremely violent. Um, and rightly so. But I think that what continues with the kind of playfulness, um, the bathtub scene, the just all of the humor of, I mean, White Boy Bob is the character from the book, and we went to great lengths. My friend Rick Yorn had a friend who was a kicker in the NFL, and he introduced us to, I mean, we started reading football players, because none of the actors had that physicality
yes,
that made it funny.
and it was
Yeah,
perfect.
I mean, it had to be, it had to be when he tripped. And I don't know if Scott discussed this, but the combination on the lock in the Rippers is his birthday,
No, he didn't say that.
where the toupees are hiding.
Right, that was so perfect.
I feel like a lot of people have stolen Dutch's idea of diamonds in a fish tank. And that's appeared in other things. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was really grateful that I don't know if you remember this, but I was really grateful to Sam for doing that cameo as a favor to me. Um, and especially because he had done the read through and we really wanted him to play Delroy Lindo's part in and Delroy's wonderful in it. So it's
He
I'm
is one.
taking
Yes,
nothing
he is.
away from Delroy, but Sam was originally going to do that part in Get Shorty. And MGM had us under enormous budget pressure and wouldn't pay him what he deserved to be paid after being nominated and should have won an Oscar for Pulp Fiction. So I was very grateful that Sam agreed to do that for us.
Oh, it must have been really like a blow that that the premiere happened when it happened, and but they did bring it back for a critical uh, showing in the fall when it should have been.
Yeah, we all kind of chalk that up to the fact that we didn't know any better, and none of us had ever had a movie come out in the summer at that point, in the peak of summer. And what we didn't really understand at that point and learn the hard way was that counter programming is uh, in the summer is a romantic comedy up against a Star Wars movie, not a smaller action movie up against a giant action movie.
Right.
And we were a fall film and we should have come out in the fall. And, I think Scott deserved to win the Oscar. I was thrilled that Ann Coates was nominated. Um, it was it began an incredible relationship between Soderbergh and David Holmes, our composer. Like we knew it was funny. Karen Rackman was the music supervisor on Get Shorty, and she had pitched Barry. We had worked with her a bunch. She's an old friend of mine. I started working with her on a long time ago. We became friends when I was still working for Deborah Hill and Linda Obst. And we were talking about acid jazz, which, Cantaloupe, that reworking of Cantaloupe, and then using Booker T and the MGs became Chili's sound, right? And she was not the music supervisor on Out of Sight. Anita Camarata was, but that gave us the thinking, and we talked to Stephen about that the sound of that movie was trip hop, which was just really starting, and there were bands like Portishead and DJ Shadow, and all of that stuff was just really starting. And that was kind of the sound. And in fact, people had done demos for us that were literally those kinds of performers that weren't as good as ultimately what David was able to do. And we recorded the score kind of live at the studio at the Sunset Tower Hotel.
Hmm. Well, going back to to '97 when Dutch just started doing the Be Cool research, and Anita uh, uh, Camarada, because at that point Jersey also had a music division. People
That's
don't
right.
know that now, and and I remember uh, the memo sheet that she gave me. I mean, it was like a who's who of and we met Guy Oseary and Rick Rubin
Rick Rubin, who is an old friend of mine. Yeah.
and Terry Anzaldo, who was
Yeah.
Madonna's song plugger, who became a character,
Yeah.
and we went to a Red Hot Chili Peppers practice, getting ready for a gig in Japan, and and on and on and on. It was just incredible that and all and Michael Schamberg gave us all kinds of books and information, and it was just wow, you're doing my job for me.
It
It
was
was
really
great.
fun.
Um, uh, but let's talk a little bit about Karen Cisco.
Yep. My heartbreak, because it was my idea to do a TV series. Scott had the best description of how to do it and what it should have been, and the network never understood it, which was a father-daughter Rockford Files, if you remember that old TV show.
Oh, I've watched every episode twice. Yes, yes. And but that vibe did come across, but it's not in the same way. Dutch
Well,
always
because the
thought,
casting was so fantastic.
oh, it was Bill Duke. I mean, you know, great, great,
Well,
yeah, and Robert Forster. Rest in
Robert
peace.
and Carla are so fantastic together.
I,
Um,
I just have to say parenthetically a little street level Hollywood story, but you know my gym was down on Santa Monica on the other side of La Cienega, and every day I would walk down Santa Monica and I would pass this little restaurant and Bob would be in there, Robert Forster would be in there, you know, in the corner booth having breakfast. And I went in a couple times and said hello, but you know he was a very cool guy.
yeah, he was lovely. He
But
was lovely. So that show is my heartbreak. It was my heartbreak because Michael Dinner brought in a showrunner who and had just had his child, so he wasn't available to be involved. And this guy, Bob Brush,
yes.
didn't understand the book, didn't really care, didn't care what Scott thought, didn't care what Dutch thought, didn't want to hear from either one of them. And the way that television was organized then was definitely that guy was not asking what would Elmore Leonard do, like the Graham Yost stories I always hear. And I'm
Yes.
always like, why didn't we have Graham Yost? Why were we stuck with this guy who did not understand what we were after? Now, in fairness, I would say we were a cable show on network television
That's
and
right.
we were ahead of our time,
That's
which,
right.
my sensibility, not surprising. And of course, um, you know, Sarah, Carl, and John who were all key parts of the team. Sarah and Carl were our studio executives at UCP. And John, of course, was Danny Michael and my partner in Jersey Television, all went on to have great success with Justified. And I'm so thrilled for them and Elmore. It just breaks my heart because Karen Cisco should have been a show that ran for seasons and seasons and seasons.
And you know, and Dutch felt that you know he had his criticisms, but he felt that it was starting to to reach its potential. And then
Karen Cisco was the heartbreak. An incredible cast, an incredible group of people. Ultimately, Scott Frank always saw it as father-daughter Macmillan. Sorry, let me start that again. Sorry. It's end of the day, brain. Wait, I have to also consent to being recorded. There we go. Um, so Karen Cisco was really the one that got away, the heartbreak. That's a show that should have run for years and years and years, but in a lot of ways, I think we were a cable TV show in the days of network television still being dominant before broadcast cable really was a thing. And as evidenced by the fact that my fellow EP, the great John Landgraf, went on to have such enormous success with Dutch's work with Justified.
and then do you want to just wrap it
Okay,
up?
I'll do the wrap up. I mean, Greg, I just feel really lucky that that I got to know Dutch, that we all had these incredible memories in Miami and Detroit, in Los Angeles, and got to be a small part of the extraordinary talent that is Elmore Leonard.
Well, I just want to add to that like with Justify with Get Shorty and Out of Sight, um, and throw in Jackie Brown, but those three films and the two films that you did, and Michael and Danny, they'll never be topped. They'll never be topped.
Yeah, we also had fun on Be Cool. And I think I maybe we had too much fun researching and prepping Be Cool, but it was really incredible for me to have a glimpse into yours and Dutch's process as you did the research for that book. And I always remember the ways in which I remember he was first going to set it in the fashion business. And then after the research you did, there wasn't enough organized crime and conflict anymore in the schmata business. So he switched to the music business for the follow-up book. So that it was an incredible journey to be a part of, and I'm happy to have been able to be a small part of doing justice to his work.